to us, what kind of help is there. But I won't take up too much time. I'm thinking maybe about 30 minutes to give you some time at the end there to ask some questions. So I thought what might be helpful, I've been out, I think this is maybe my third time coming out to talk about domestic violence, and I thought it might be helpful to focus on what we're hearing a lot from adolescents. So the dynamics in abusive relationships are not totally different between adolescents and adults, but they can take on slightly different forms. And so I thought it might be helpful with the kiddos you're working with to focus on what we see with adolescents, but no, the dynamics are pretty similar with what we see with adults too. But adolescent dating violence seems to be increasing in the U.S. So I've been at the Center for Women and Families about 4.5 years. When I started, the Office on Women's Health was estimating about 1 in 5 high school age girls would be the victim of violence in a dating relationship. And I already thought that was pretty high and was pretty concerned. Their most recent report, they're now finding numbers closer to 1 in 3 high school age girls will be the victim of physical or sexual violence in a dating relationship. And that's just the 4.5 years I've been there. We've seen that much of an increase. So we're seeing more and more of it and responding more and more at the center. And so I just wanted to kind of talk about the dynamics that we see with teens a lot and what kind of services we provide for them if you ever wanted to refer anyone. And I'm going to pass around this, if you just move to one and wait more time, maybe.
We might speak to them.
Oh yes, definitely. Has anyone, I know some of you have seen a power and control wheel before. Has anyone not seen a power and control wheel before? So the power and control wheel essentially just takes abusive behaviors and breaks them down into categories so they're more easily identifiable. It is a really interesting tool. This is something that we'll use with clients sometimes, and it's interesting the first time some people will take a look at this. We'll have them say things like, were you guys in my house watching me? How did you know all this stuff was going on? Because they read it and it reads just like their relationship, because those behaviors are so typical across relationships. And so it's a pretty effective tool for identifying abusive behaviors. The way that we would define dating violence or domestic violence or intimate partner violence at the center is to say it's a pattern of behaviors used by one person to gain and maintain power and control over another person in an intimate relationship. So it's not just about the physical violence, it really is about power and control. And when you look around the wheel, you can see all the different ways that people exercise power and control in a relationship. So I thought what might be helpful is just to go around this wheel. Obviously there's a lot you can read on your own, but just highlight the stuff we're hearing about from teens a lot, and share a couple of stories so you can get a real clear idea of what this looks like in a relationship that's abusive for an adolescent. Do you all have any questions before I sort of jump into the power and control wheel, or anything you want to make sure I talk about, any dynamics you want to make sure I talk about before we go?
No.
If you have a question or thought, as I go through here, just interrupt me, because otherwise I'll just keep going. I always have more to say, but I have to say them. So feel free to exercise your right to interrupt. But I'm just going to start with this top wedge of the, sort of top right wedge of the wheel, anger, emotional abuse. We definitely hear a lot from teens about put downs, their partners yelling at them, cursing at them. The other thing that we've seen happening a lot with this sort of emotional abuse is control around weight, particularly with girls. And girls are disproportionately the victims of dating violence. So constant put downs about weight, calling somebody fat, and imposing dietary restrictions. I can remember this one girl who came to the center. She was 18 when she came to us. She was 15 when she started dating her boyfriend, and she said when they started dating she weighed around 125 pounds. When she came to the center she weighed 86 pounds. Yeah, it was awful, and he just kept her on a diet of lettuce and water all the time. Yeah, he had her on this diet of lettuce and water all the time and was constantly criticizing her food and everything that she put into her mouth and calling her fat all the time when, you know, she was a perfectly healthy weight to begin with. So that's some of this anger, emotional abuse. The next piece in here, using social status, I have lost it. Send down that way. This is pretty big with teens. I mean, the whole idea of social standing and popularity is really important to them. Electronic media can also be a tool to sort of facilitate this control in a relationship and exploit somebody's social status. The other thing that would fall in this category that we hear about a lot are same-sex relationships with teens and threatening to out somebody to their friends, to their parents, or to other adults in their life. That might be this kind of using social status as a way to sort of exercise privilege or control somebody based on their social identity. The next one in here, intimidation, can take a lot of different forms. I mean, obviously there are a lot of ways to intimidate. The things that we hear about from teens the most are damaging and destroying property is huge with intimidation, and also reckless driving. Just flying down the road and swerving all over the place and trying to make this person afraid you're going to get them hurt. The other thing we would include in the intimidation category is stalking behaviors. Stalking happens a lot in abusive relationships, and when I first started working at the center, just kind of assumed stalking is what happens when people leave the abusive relationship, their partners start to stalk them. In fact, it's a lot more common while people are in the abusive relationship, still with that person, that they're engaging in stalking behaviors. For someone who is being stalked, it is incredibly difficult to identify because it's just this series of little individual behaviors, and it's hard to pin anyone down. Maybe it would be more helpful to ask, what are some things that stalkers do? Can you name some things that you've heard about that a stalker might do?
Call repeatedly.
Call repeatedly, okay. Sit, okay, yeah, sits outside your job or school or wherever you are.
Follow.
Yep, follow you right there.
Looking in your windows. Yep. Looking in your windows.
Looking in your windows.
Your home.
Would they ever have a friend check in on you if they're too busy to, or would the stalker always do it themselves?
Oh no, they definitely have friends check in, and we'll check in with your friends, and social media really facilitates this well. Like, I hear a lot of people use this term Facebook stalking, and I get that it's a joke, like it's 3 in the morning and you're looking at pictures of someone you haven't seen in 10 years, and that's kind of weird, but really stalkers love Facebook. I mean, someone who's engaging in stalking behavior, it's such an effective tool. You know, not only, I have updates on everything that you're doing. There are events you can click on and say you're going to be there, and I've got a list of all your friends and family members. So if I can't get a hold of you, I can check in with them about what you're doing and where you're going. The reason that I ask that question is to ask, is any one of these behaviors in and of themselves illegal? Not one. No, not one of those by themselves is illegal. And not one of those behaviors in isolation might even make somebody totally terrified. I mean, somebody who's showing up where I am all the time, if I'm a teenager, maybe I tell myself, well, maybe they like me and they don't have good social skills and they don't get that that's not creepy. It's so hard for people to identify that I'm going to take each of these individual behaviors and string that together into something I'm actually going to give a name to and something I'm going to call stalking. People are a lot more likely to brush it off and tell themselves I'm just being paranoid. It's a really dangerous behavior. The likelihood that stalking is going to end in violence is pretty high. Most stalking does end in violence. And the way that we distinguish stalking at the center from those sort of poor social skill behaviors is to say it's a course of conduct that would make a reasonable person feel afraid. So if you've got a girl who leaves a rose and a love note on her boyfriend's windshield every morning, golly, she's so sweet. If it's there no matter where his car is parked every morning, if he goes out to the gym or wherever, I mean, that might not be so sweet anymore. We might say that's going to make a body be afraid. And that makes it a stalking behavior, not a romantic behavior. So that's some of that intimidation. The next piece in here, minimizing, denying, and blaming. This is what some of our clients will call crazy making or brainwashing. That's what it feels like for them. So minimizing abusive behavior so it doesn't seem like anything you should be upset about, and people feel like this is kind of brainwashing, that they don't know to recognize it as abusive behavior, or denying that altogether. So we had a girl who, she and her boyfriend were at this football game. When they were leaving the football game, he pushed her down the bleachers. She fell and broke her arm. When she came back, she didn't talk to him for the rest of the weekend, came back to school on Monday and said, "Why did you shove me?" And he said, "Why did I do what?" And she said, "Shove me. Why did you shove me?" He goes, "I didn't shove you, you fell." And she's going, "No, I was there, you shoved me." He said, "Girl, you have to be crazy if you think I shoved you. I was standing behind you the whole time. I watched you trip and fall." And so she hears this and starts to feel like she is going crazy because she has this clear memory of him pushing her, and here he is saying that's not what happened in the first place. And then the last piece in there, the blaming, is also a really confusing message. Usually blaming happens in the context of an apology. So it'll sound something like, "Oh, I'm so sorry I hurt you. I can't believe I did that. I'm so sorry. It was so wrong. It's just that you put on that TV show I hate and it pissed me off, and I got so carried away. I can't believe that I acted that way. I love you so much. I swear it won't happen again." You hear the blame shift in the middle? So when you're the target of that message, it's very confusing because on the surface I sound like I'm totally apologetic and taking responsibility for everything I've done, but really what I'm communicating to you is this is your fault, you know, if you just hadn't have. And so I think it's not, for me, like when I think about the teens we work with, it's not that shocking that the first thought in their mind isn't, you know, I need to break up with this person. It's usually, oh, I should have known. You know, we don't want to upset the people we care about, especially if they really like them, don't want to upset them. Well, if I can just remember what they like and don't like, if I can anticipate their needs, I don't want to make them so upset again. So that's that little wedge of the wheel. The next piece in here, threats. There's definitely lots of direct threats to hurt that person. What we hear a whole lot from adolescents is a boyfriend or girlfriend threatening to hurt themselves or threatening to kill themselves. You know, if you break up with me, I'm going to kill myself or I'm going to hurt myself, as a way to exercise control in that relationship. The next one in here, sexual coercion. So this happens in a lot of abusive relationships, forcing someone to have sex or engage in sexual activity when they don't want to. We definitely hear about a lot of pressure happening in teen relationships. If there's a history of other kinds of physical violence in the relationship, it makes it almost easier for somebody to perpetrate sexual assault. Because what happens is, if somebody has used violence against me before when I did not do what they wanted me to do, I might have come to learn the lesson that I had better not ever say no to this person again. And so if I go along with their sexual demands only because I'm afraid I'm going to get hurt if I don't, well, that's not consenting to sexual activity. That's the very definition of coercion. And that's happening a lot in teen relationships. The other thing we're hearing about a lot in this category that is more and more concerning to me is reproductive coercion and control. It's very common with teen girls that their boyfriends are trying to get them pregnant when they don't want to be. Very common. There was a guy named Jay Silverman does a lot of research on this. He's found at least 2/3 of teenage girls in abusive relationships say their boyfriends are trying to get them pregnant and they don't want to be. And that teenage girls in abusive relationships are 7 times more likely to become pregnant than teenage girls who are not in abusive relationships. So forcing someone to have sex when they don't want to have sex, trying to keep them from using birth control, and it can be threats around birth control. You know, if you're on birth control, that means you're going to sleep with everybody and cheat on me and you're not allowed to use that. Or tricking someone, claiming that a condom is being used and pulling it off at the last second, trying to sabotage birth control, flush pills down the toilet, things like that. The reproductive control and the sexual assault sort of go hand in hand. Jay Silverman, that researcher, did a series of focus groups with boys who were abusive. These are all teenage boys who had self-identified they had been abusive. When he got them into groups, one thing he asked them about was condom use. Well, no, most of them did not use condoms. When he asked them why, the #1 response he got was that their girlfriends did not want to have sex. And so if they had to take the time to put on a condom, she would have too much time to run away. So they were sexually assaulting, and the reproductive control and sexual assault were going hand in hand in their behaviors. Yeah, it was absolutely shocking when I read that research, and just it's getting more and more concerning for us at the center, especially seeing more and more teenage girls who are coming in pregnant. The CDC is now sort of debating whether or not they're going to list teen pregnancy as a risk factor for dating violence, and what it would mean if they did is that these issues have gotten to a point where they co-occur so frequently that where we see teen pregnancy, we should have a pretty strong reason to suspect teen dating violence and start asking about it because they co-occur so frequently. So that's some of the sexual coercion, yeah. The next piece in here, isolation and exclusion. So isolation is usually the first controlling behavior used in these abusive relationships, trying to cut somebody off from their friends or pull them away from social activities. Isolation is kind of like stalking in that it's almost impossible to see it happening to you while it's happening. I mean, teenagers are just so attention-seeking all the time that when they have a boyfriend or girlfriend who is paying constant attention and always wants to be by their side and wants them to stay home with them, I mean, in their minds it's like, I'm getting all this attention, they must love me so much. And there's a real difficult time telling the difference between jealousy and love in teen relationships, and somebody who's good at this control makes their jealousy seem just like love. It just sounds like, I miss you so much and we never get alone time together and I have so much fun when I'm with you, and even when we're hanging out with our friends I miss you because it's not alone time, and don't you have fun when we're together, and these messages that just make you feel really special and there's no other context of control to put it into, and so it's really hard for them to identify. And I think the thing that makes it even more difficult for teens to identify isolation is that they see it all the time happening with friends in perfectly healthy relationships. So like they'll watch a friend, and this happens with adults too, you might have seen it. Somebody gets a new boyfriend or girlfriend and it's like for the first couple of months they just crawl up each other's butts, for lack of a better term, and nobody sees from them or hears them. It happens a lot in perfectly healthy relationships. They see this kind of thing happening with their friends all the time. So if I'm that girl who's being isolated by my boyfriend, how do I tell the difference between this is that normal thing I've seen happen a million times with my friends, or this is somebody who's deliberately trying to cut me off? It can be really difficult. So that's the isolation. The last one in here, peer pressure. Social relationships are really important to adolescents, and so using the peers as a way to have control is something that we hear about a whole lot. Spreading lies about somebody. We just had this little boy who came in who was in a relationship with another boy who was 16, who started to go around and tell everyone that he had AIDS. Was telling everybody in the school that he had AIDS and don't see him and don't get near him. Trying to use peers as a way to have control and keep him in the relationship, because if everybody else thinks you have AIDS, well then nobody else is going to date you and you have to stay with me. Or threatening to tell secrets to parents is something that we hear about a lot as a way to sort of exercise this pressure in a peer relationship. So that's the power and control wheel, and that's, you know, now that we've been around, the things that we hear about a lot happening in relationships. Do you all have any questions about anything in the wheel or anything I might have left out that you wonder about?
When you use the wheel, is there usually a couple of spokes that are always, you know, is it, when you see a girl, is it always this one, and this one, more than 2 or 3 of these, or all of them at the same time?
It depends. I mean, it tends to, like, it's a slow escalation of control. And it's interesting that it's laid out in this really flat way, and here I am presenting it, like, here are all these behaviors as if they're all of a sudden there. It's a very slow escalation of control. And so it often starts out with this isolation. The emotional abuse will happen in the relationship, coercion, threats, things like that. Physical violence and sexual violence, which are going to sort of go around the wheel, are usually sort of the last kinds of control. People exercise, like these boys will say things like, I don't hit unless I have to. So if I feel like I can exercise a sufficient amount of control with all of these other behaviors, I won't put myself at risk of getting in trouble by hurting someone. And so when somebody first comes to us, it might not have reached the point where it's physical violence or sexual violence. They're only experiencing a few of these other kinds of control. But often that's not the case with the people we see at the center, because kids are not very likely to reach out for help until things get really bad.
So they're forced to.
Yeah, yeah. And they'll minimize it or not know to identify it as abusive behavior, and we would still be there for them. If it were just, say, the emotional abuse and isolation and someone making threats, we absolutely would provide the services, but they're probably not going to reach out for help until things get physical and get really bad, or they're made to reach out for help on the part of an adult.
Do you know what numbers are, like, teens in bad domestic situations versus adults who go into the same situation?
You mean like if they've been in that situation as a teen, are they more likely as an
Right.
adult? No, the research seems to indicate like your history of victimization doesn't make you any more likely to be a victim in the future. No, I mean, I read that and I think about some of our clients. You think about some of your clients probably who have
Right.
a history of just unhealthy
Right.
relationships. So anecdotally, it doesn't seem to be the case. But when you look at the data, they're saying that your history of victimization doesn't affect your the likelihood that you're going to be victimized in the future. It does affect perpetration though. So somebody who's been a victim in a previous relationship is a lot more likely to perpetrate violence in a future relationship. And that's the same for boys and girls both. There was a study done, IU did a study, this was maybe 3 years ago, where they were looking at female perpetrators of domestic violence, and they found, I think it was 93% of them had previously been victims of domestic violence, and had sort of entered this new relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you learn those.
And that was my
behaviors.
next question, is do you have numbers, or has anybody looked at, like, the number of kids who come out of situations that there was domestic violence and then go into being the bad person in the relationship?
Yeah, most kids who grow up in homes with domestic violence won't become abusive. And there's this real, like, I feel like this will not. I feel like this is one of the more pervasive myths around domestic violence, because I hear it all the time, and I'll have people who call me and say, will you come in and do a training on the generational cycle of violence? And when you look at the data, there's not a generational cycle. The Department of Justice estimates two-thirds of kids who grow up around domestic violence will never become abusive. So that's the large majority.
Right.
More of them will become abusive than kids who don't grow up in homes with violence. So without a doubt, their risk to be abusive is higher, but still the majority aren't. And when you look at the group of abusers as a whole, the majority of them did not grow up in homes with violence. So like even the kids who are learning violence in childhood and carrying it into adult relationships still don't account for the majority of abusers. And so I think the sort of effect on kids is a lot more nuanced than that. The idea that we all get taught, and I got taught coming into the work, clear-cut generational cycle of violence.
It just seems like there's a correlation between bullying in general and domestic violence, but also self-esteem issues. And I think that right now, would you guys say most of our girls seem to have?
Oh, absolutely, every one of them.
Self-esteem
And
issues.
we've got a female resident right now whose journal I found, and I mean, as soon as you say the situation, everybody in here that's worked with her will know, but whose journal I found, whose idea of staying out of placement is to get pregnant. I mean, and begging her boyfriend, please, I know it's the solution, this is what we need to do.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
So, I mean, yeah, you see it.
Low self-esteem is definitely a big risk factor for victimization in abusive relationships, and there's a very strong correlation with bullying behaviors, perpetrating bullying behaviors and perpetrating abuse. And we do bullying prevention education now at the center and go into school starting young. Yeah, starting very young in first grade, doing bullying prevention because there is such a strong connection. And if we can address those behaviors early and make an impact, and a lot of the bullying prevention work is bystander intervention work, because kids are really good at stopping bullies. If they know like what to cue to with a bully and they feel like they have some skills to step in and say something, they're way better at it than adults
Right. Well,
are.
I mean, they're going to listen to their peers much more than they would listen to their parents. You know, I mean, that's effective. You know, it's typical, right?
Yeah.
The peer pressure thing.
Oh, yeah.
But so what can we do? I mean, we're seeing, like I said, we're seeing a lot of bullying behavior, and we're seeing a lot of self-esteem issues. And sometimes the bulliers are the kids with the self-esteem issues.
self-esteem.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that does spill over, because I know that I've heard some of the girls say, you know, that their boyfriends really do isolate them, and he wants to be with me all the time. I've heard that, you know, with some of our kids. But what can we do to help them, you know, while they're in here, you know, for the short period of time that they're here?
I think helping them recognize what abusive behaviors look like and know to call it abuse. I think that's a big problem with kids, that they think of abuse as hitting and physical violence and don't know to call these other things abuse in a relationship. And so, and you can keep all these extra copies and share with the kids. And I also brought lots of, and I'll just lay these here, these teen zines that are all about healthy dating relationships and what dating violence looks like, and just some bookmarks with real quick information that you can share with the kids. But helping them know how to identify it, and I think building self-esteem is huge. And that can happen, I think in a one-on-one setting. I think in a group setting, it sometimes is even more effective with teens, where they are, it's again what you were saying, that kids listen to their peers a lot better than they listen to adults. And so when their peers are the one building up their self-esteem and telling them what's good about them, it often can mean a lot more than having an adult who it seems like it's your job to tell me this kind of stuff.
Right. And I think, honestly, that if kids got this kind of information, the younger, the better, because it seems like they are more invested in what their peers are doing when they're younger, and they're more likely to go along with the crowd once they hit, you know, middle school. So,
and I got this power and control wheel. We had a team one that was old, like created before Facebook and technology, which changes everything. So I got this new power and control wheel from loveisrespect.org. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's MTV's dating violence campaign. So they created this website, Love is Respect. This school was on there, and MTV is the favorite channel among middle school students. So hopefully they're getting some exposure to the information if they're seeing it in the media. Now they, turn on a music video and it sends the exact opposite message of what they're hearing around dating violence, but it's something in terms of the exposure. Yeah.
Do we know like numbers of if this is how my friend treats his girlfriend, so now that I have somebody, this is how I'm going to treat him, and it becomes okay because your friend's doing the same thing?
Yes, that's another one of the, when I talked about the CDC risk factors, having violent peers and peers who engage in violent behavior is a risk factor for perpetrating yourself.
I mean, because I can see somebody falling into that very, well, boy doesn't hurt his girl, so, and then as the guy saying to the female, well, so-and-so does it, and she's just fine with it. So why are you causing such a scene over it?
Yeah, And when you look at the bystander literature, I was talking about this bystander intervention, which we do around dating violence too. Most kids are not okay with dating violence when they see it. Like they'll say in a survey it makes them really uncomfortable, but they don't speak up and say anything. They sort of acquiesce and act like, oh yeah, that's perfectly okay for you to treat your girlfriend that way. So the other kid who hears it and cues to, oh, well then it must be okay for me to treat my girlfriend that way. So most are uncomfortable and most want it to stop. They just don't feel like they have the skills or know what to say. And
Well,
so
you're
the
not the cool
message is,
person
we
if you
tolerate
tell them to
this.
stop.
Yeah. Yeah. Joel, have any questions overall about like what we do at the Center for Women and Families? I said I'd talk about the services.
What do you do?
We have a 24-hour crisis line, and the crisis line phone number is on all of this information. So kids can access that anytime. It's totally anonymous. They don't have to identify themselves when they call us. They can make up names, whatever, that's fine. We have looked at getting an instant messaging crisis counseling service because it seems like teens are more likely to use that. It's too expensive for us to do it. But there's a website called that'snotcool.com that's all about digital dating abuse. So like pressure to send nude photos over a cell phone or controlling somebody electronically. It's sort of the theme of the website. And they do have instant messaging crisis counseling on their website. So that's an option that kids can get access to, even though we don't have it. We also take walk-ins 24 hours a day, so no matter when somebody's affected, they can come in and see us. We're a YMCA Safe Play site in Floyd County, which probably wouldn't coordinate, I guess, still I know. The Floyd County, we're a YMCA Safe Play site, but the shelter's in Floyd County, so that probably would never cross paths
Yeah,
on
it
Safe
would
Play
be one of ours.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't
Clark
think
and
we've gotten a
Floyd
Safe Place kiddo in there since I've worked at the center, but.
Yeah. No, you don't have a sign in.
I think we do. At
A
the
Safe Place?
Southern Indiana shelter.
They're on Charlestown Road?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
I think we do.
It's not on the road.
Yeah, it's hard
Like,
to get
it's-
to. I mean,
yeah,
that's
it's
why,
quite
and I
okay.
think Meyer does have a Safe Place sign. Well, you probably would know, but there are places that are a lot easier to access on Charlestown Road than us
Yeah.
that do have Safe
But
Place
yeah,
signs.
Myers isn't, but you're gonna have like Thornton's and things, yeah. But there's not a whole lot on that road,
Yeah,
unless you go down to the other end.
yeah, and we're off the bus line totally too.
Mhm.
So, harder to access us, but we do, if a kiddo walked up and needed a safe place, we'd make sure that they got connected with getting to a safe place. We have emergency shelter for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault who need a safe place to stay. We can't shelter kids by themselves. So kids who are coming in and staying with the parent can stay in the shelter. If a kid comes in by themselves, we're going to start YMCA Safe Place procedures and make sure they can get to a place that can shelter them overnight. And then we provide non-residential services, and most of our clients are non-residential, never have, never will stay in shelter with us, and that's definitely the case for adolescents. So they can come in and receive one-on-one counseling and therapy, and also work in a support group with other kids who've been through a similar situation. And they can access that. They can access that counseling just by walking in the front door. They can call and set up an appointment. We are allowed to see kiddos for up to 3 sessions before we get parental consent, and the reason is that we serve kids who have been victims of sexual abuse. And it could be that the parent is the perpetrator of that sexual abuse, and so the state has given us permission to have up to 3 sessions to establish who that perpetrator is. If it turns out it's the parent, then we can get a waiver of parental consent. If it's not a parent, then we have to have the parent's consent. But we can see him at least those 3 times before we have to worry about getting consent from a parent.
Now, is that in Indiana or Kentucky or both?
It's Indiana and Kentucky both. Yeah. It's both the Indiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault and the Kentucky Coalitions are operating under the same principle. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, and that's where we get our permission from to do that. Yes, but of course with crisis counseling, just call in. They can call as many times as they want. There's no restriction on 3 because they don't have to tell us who they are when they call, so we can't necessarily keep track of it. We also do outreach stuff. We respond to hospitals 24 hours a day for anyone who's been a victim of domestic violence or sexual assault. We'll go out and just be with them in the hospital setting, and we'll go along with folks to court. So if a kiddo needs to apply for a protective order in court, or they have some kind of criminal trial related to dating violence or sexual assault, it's hard to go through that by yourself, and we'll just kind of go along with them so they don't have to go through it alone. We actually went along with Meredith, one of our legal advocates in Floyd County, went along for a protective order hearing around bullying. It was a group of teenage girls. I think they were all New Albany High girls, and it all involved cyberbullying. And so the judge the girls had submitted to the judge ahead of time printouts of all the threats and things that were happening online. It was Magistrate Burke, and he said he did not think that he was going to issue the protective order once they got in there. He thought he was going to deny it because they weren't proving that violence was likely to happen until the girls got into the courtroom. And the way that the bullies acted in the courtroom, they were so intimidating and terrible in the courtroom that it changed his mind, and he decided, I'm going to issue a protective order for this. Yeah.
Wow.
Which was really, I mean, I can't think of a case like that with the protective order and bullying that I've seen since we've been at the center. So that was really a change in being able to offer protection. I'm trying to think if there's anything that I have not mentioned in terms of services. There are a couple services provided for us by other agencies. TARC provides a free ride to anybody who needs to get to the center. So if a kiddo doesn't have transportation of their own, they can hop on a TARC. The bus will go on its normal route, but they'll call out somebody in a car. It works real similar to Safe Place. Meet the bus on route and then drive that person straight out to the center. Although I'd imagine if they're a kid, they probably would just bring them to the Safe Place site. I don't imagine even if they wanted to get to the center that they'd bring them to us, unless they were coming with a parent. And then one of our major services that's not kind of direct service is prevention, and I've talked about this a little. We are really big on prevention and getting on the front end of this and stopping violence before it happens. And when I started working at the center, like, people thought I was crazy when I would say prevention. There's no way. I mean, people who've been in this work for decades and just thought, you young, crazy thing, this is a pipe dream, there's no way that you're going to stop violence. It's not so crazy. There's actually a science behind this in the public health field. You can look at evidence-based strategies where you see a measurable reduction in violence over time. I mean, I can't imagine anything more exciting.
Awareness. I mean, it's like anything else.
Yeah.
If you're aware of it, then you can stop it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Good
simple.
Yeah.
Simple, yeah.
So we're big on prevention. We're really lucky to get, the CDC has put a lot of money into violence prevention, and so we're lucky that we get to focus on prevention. We're not all social service agencies get to sort of try to get on the front end of things. So I am confident someday I'm going to retire and I will have seen this measurable reduction and retire knowing I've kept kids from getting hurt. I can't imagine anything more exciting.
And do you go into schools and talk to the schools, the girls or boys? Well, I guess what boys.
She's going to come here too and talk to our kids.
Oh, that'd be great. Could you go out there now?
Do you guys
I'm just kidding.
We do have a few that could use
Yeah, we
it.
really
We
could.
really
I
have
mean,
a
I'll
few
pull them right
that
back
really-
here for you if you want me to. We got a couple that.
Now, do you do cell phones, the like 911 phones? Do you do that?
We do, yeah. It's called the Hope Line, and Verizon provides the phones and provides the service, and we just kind of disperse them to people.
I didn't know if you collected, because I remember when you do collect phones.
Yeah, we do. We collect phones at the shelter. If you ever have an old cell phone you want to donate, and Verizon will scrub it and turn it around and give it to a victim of domestic violence for safety purposes.
Awesome.
We'll take the donations in shelter, and you can drop them off at any Verizon store, and they come right back to us. It's the same program. Yeah. Yeah, they usually have a box that says Hope Line or Hope Phone, something like that in the store.
That's great.
You may have any other questions?
To get a better idea of how your services work, I've been beat up by my boyfriend, and I call, I'm crying, and I get that counselor, they try to talk me down, and, then what would happen?
Usually we try to create a safety plan. So figure out what you're doing now to keep yourself safe in that relationship, where you feel like you still are looking at some risks and where you might have the potential to get hurt, and then writing a plan about how we can sort of mitigate those risks. If it's using services at the center, if it's applying for a protective order, if it's just changing your routine, whatever it might look like. And for some people, the best way to reduce their risk is to stay in the relationship. It's almost like keep your friends close and enemies closer. That idea that when I'm still with this person and can monitor their behavior versus leaving and getting them really upset where they're going to come after me. And so for some people, the best safety plan is they stay in the relationship for now and try and reduce the risks in other ways. For some people, the best safety plan is pick up all your stuff and go to a shelter. So it's really individualized client-defined safety planning, and that's generally what we'll do, is create a plan with somebody for their safety, and then just provide sort of basic counseling, sort of validating the experience that they're going through.
What if somebody calls you and wants to get out of a situation but doesn't have a ride? Did I miss that part?
The people can get a free ride on TARC through the Ride to Safety
Okay.
program, and if somebody can't get to a TARC, like somebody's way out
right.
in Georgetown or whatever, we'll pay for taxis.
Okay.
And we get discounted vouchers from cab companies, so we're not, we benefit a lot from their discounts, but yeah.
That was
we'll
my
always
question,
make sure
if you
there's a
couldn't
safe
make,
way.
I mean, the TARC would, but if you couldn't make it to a TARC,
Yeah.
then you all have.
Yeah, definitely.
Basically, there's no reason not to get the help then if you're really wanting it and needing it.
Well,
the services are there.
Yeah.
It's tough. I mean, still for some people, they almost feel like they're in more danger if they reach out for the help. If their partner, they call the crisis line and the person checks their phone record or things like that. That, they'll try to put barriers in the way to reaching out for help. We'll also help with transportation out of the area too, like somebody who just wants to flee. We had a woman who came into the shelter in New Albany and wanted to get as far away from this guy as she could, and so we got a hold of a shelter in, I think it was Elkhart, like way up tip top north of Indiana. So we could only transport her sort of to the limit of our service area, and we just got on the phone and sort of arranged a caravan. So we got her up to the Salem shelter. Wow. The Salem shelter got her to the next shelter. Great. And got her all the way up to Elkhart. Yeah, it was really,
wow.
it was really cool.
Yeah.
And she's doing good. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
That is awesome.
Well, thank you.
Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
I have these, I call these, well, and I know you drink coffee and everything, and I do have coffee mugs, but I call these my bathroom cups.
Oh my God.
They're the
I have this on
perfect
video, I
size
hope
for
you
my
know.
bathroom. Okay, I'm sorry, but